South Africa's ruling ANC party is locked in internal talks to decide how to form a government after it failed to win an outright majority in last month's general election. President Cyril Ramaphosa's African National Congress won 40% of the vote, its lowest score ever, and for the first time since the advent of democracy in 1994, the party needs the backing of other parties. For a deep dive into the deliberations, I was earlier joined in the studio by Africa analyst Tamzane Kajo. Tamzane Kajo, as always, a pleasure having you in the studio. There's so much going on geopolitically at the moment that there are big stories that get buried because it's, there's another big story that comes after it. But we've got to talk about the results in the South African elections because it has shocked a lot of people, none less than those living in the country. What are the implications of the election results and how is it going to shape governance of the nation over the next few years?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Juliana, and your viewers. Very lovely, very good feedback we always get. Well, South African election results coming, well, more or less at the same time that India,
yes,
the biggest democracy in the world,
exactly,
is also having a result that a lot of people did not expect.
Yes.
And Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party not getting
the majority. Yep.
In South Africa, the African National Congress, the ANC, the party of Nelson Mandela.
The party of Pan-Africanism.
Oliver Tambo,
yes,
going back to Dube, Luthuli. 1912 is probably the oldest political party in Africa that was fighting for the liberation and against colonial rule in Africa.
Yeah.
So that result, being seen by some, especially in the West, is going below 50%. It is probably the wrong way to read the results.
Okay.
What has basically happened in South Africa is that the African National Congress has split into 4 factions,
okay,
who have political labels. Because in South Africa, to participate, you have to register a political movement. Or
so it's been split
party.
into 4.
So you had Holomisa with UDM in the Eastern Cape in particular. You had COP, during those Thabo Mbeki, Zuma days.
Yes.
It takes some votes, but they are still part of the ANC.
Right.
And then you had Julius Malema and others with the Economic Freedom Fighters.
Very popular thought leader on the continent.
But they were the youth movement. They carried a lot of the support of the youth within the ANC. So most of the support that you see, they get 8-9% or whatever it is, that vote might still be considered within an ideological way as part of the ANC group of families.
Is that like Reform and the
Zuma,
Conservatives?
Yes. So similar to former President Jacob Zuma. So former President Jacob Zuma says Umkhonto weSizwe was the liberation army or wing of the ANC during the fight for independence in South Africa. So what he's basically saying is he has not left the ANC. He is still a member and a card-carrying member of the ANC. But he is using the Umkhonto weSizwe to liberate the ANC from the direction that it was taking. Because he says that he believes that the ANC, as led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, is going, probably being pro-business as opposed to the values of the reason why the ANC was formed. So what you should read in the South African election is simply that there is a split within the ANC, and that is going to be what the meeting was discussing, Ekurhuleni. We call it Ekurhuleni, the emergency or the ad hoc National Executive Committee. So within the ANC that is led by Cyril Ramaphosa, they have to make that decision. Are they staying with the other bits of the ANC, the EFF, the MK, do a coalition? They still maintain they are over 60-something%. So when you add the votes for MK Party, Umkhonto weSizwe,
Yes.
of almost 15%, what the EFF got, and probably what Holomisa got, you all...
So the freedom fighters do still have the majority as a coalition.
Go back to 1994 when Nelson Mandela was there. The very first elections that South Africa had a post-apartheid. ANC got around 60, just over 60%, maybe 62%.
And this coalition,
it is still
exactly
the same. And those that were to the right, the National Party and of course Tony Leon and others, they rebranded the DA, as it's called now, the Democratic Alliance, still is seen to represent the interests of the white population in South Africa.
Talking about the Democratic Alliance.
Yes, and predominantly they still get the votes, most of the votes from those that are pro-business, businesses owned, more or less.
They're insisting this week that they are the party to partner with.
Well, that's what they will say. And of course they are pitching. And they are pitching because they say that because they are the party that is supported by most of the white people in South Africa, and because South Africa is still a country where most of the business, most of the economy is still in the hands of white people, the DA will be the party to try and galvanize that support for business. Yeah. And they are warning that if the ANC goes back to be with the MK, the EFF and others, the DA will try to influence business.
Goodness.
Not to cooperate with the new government.
What do South Africans want? And forgive my ignorance here, but as you can tell, I live in London, so there are some comparisons with what's happening in the UK, because Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has said, vote for reform is a vote for Labour. Were voters not aware of the potential issues with constantly splitting off and going into different directions? What do the people of South Africa want?
People in South Africa are very political. They fully understand and they tend to vote for the people around them. So if you were thinking in Nigeria, you might say before PDP and APC, politics was tribalized. So the people in, I don't know, if you are Igbo, you tend to vote for your Igbo based party.
I think that's fair to say.
So in South Africa, people respond to the leaders around them.
Okay.
So you will see that the DA gets most of the votes from Gauteng and the Western Cape, because that is where most of the white people are. The ANC would get votes probably spread across.
Yeah.
MK Party, most of their votes came from KwaZulu-Natal, where Zuma is from, and it's the biggest in terms of the numbers. So, and Holomisa and others will get votes in Eastern Cape. So the people in South Africa understand that their issues can only be solved and pushed, and they can only be represented well by the people they see and people they know. Yeah. So, but
is that right though? Is that accurate?
It is what it is. Okay. It is what it is. And they can hold those people to account because they know who they are. Yeah. And they understand. And they can talk to the traditional leaders, they can talk to the villagers, they can talk to the people in the city. But it becomes tricky though, because that sense of control simply means the ANC, if the ANC was to choose to have a coalition with the DA, hypothetical, the majority of the South African people have voted against that kind of coalition.
Yeah.
So what it will mean is that MK, probably EF and others, could refuse to go to be sworn in Parliament. And you have a constitutional crisis, because you can only have a parliament in South Africa if you have 350 MPs. The DA and the ANC, the two of them don't have enough MPs to form a parliament.
Goodness me. For all of us who have loved Nelson Mandela, love South Africa. We see, South Africa as the birthing place for Pan-Africanism, right? It's we want to make sure that there is political stability and good governance. So we are watching this very, very closely. Thank you so much for your insights, Tamzanka, with us. Coming up.